Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Abba, British Academy of the Department of English Literature here at Reading, working on the Publishers' Archives of the African Writers series held here at the Museum of English Oral Life. Dr. Abba is from the Department of English and Literary Studies at the Federal University of Lokoja, Nigeria, and his work on the archives here is focused on what it can tell us about how the publisher of the African Writers series, Heinemann Educational Books, responded to the Nigeria-Biafra War of 1967-1970, and how it engaged with its writers hailing from both sides of the conflict. As well as his work here at Reading, Dr. Abba has completed a postdoctoral research fellowship at Humboldt University Berlin and at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. For both of these fellowships, Dr. Abba was focused on literary representations of the Nigeria-Biafra War, of which there are a number that were published in the African Writers series, two of which he will focus on. Research focus. Dr. Abba is also a novelist and playwright, and his research interests also extend to a particular focus on eco-criticism and its relevance to Nigeria. So without further ado, I introduce to you Dr. Abba.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sue, for the very wonderful introduction. I want to welcome everyone to today's presentation to my talk, which is titled Heinemann and Biafractivist Authors, the Politics of Publishing the Rebel. So today we know who the rebels are. So I want to start this presentation with a little explanation on the Nigerian map before 1960. Before I do that, I want to give you a little background to what inspired this particular presentation. I want to take you to a period before the amalgamation of Nigeria in 1914 by Lord Lugard, who was the then Governor General, in charge of that particular area. Before then, the place we call Nigeria today had been existing as northern and southern protectorates, and they were just existing individually and separately until, for administrative convenience, Lord Lugard decided to bring them together. I do not want to take us through the entire process because it's a very long story, but I want to say that that particular strategy of collapsing or bringing together a kind of a coalition of irreconcilables remains one of the major issues confronting today. So after the amalgamation, it means that the people in southern Nigeria who had their own cultural ways of doing things, different from that of the North, were brought together to exist in a common socio-cultural space. But then, if you take a look at the map that we can see here, the whole of this place is the northern Nigeria, northern region, representing the then Northern Protectorate. And then what you see down here is the Southern Protectorate. So all of them were brought together. Now, one of the strategies was to ensure, because before then, the people from Southern Nigeria were already exposed to the Western ways of doing things, Western way of knowing. And so Lord Lugard wanted them to bring their wealth of knowledge to the development of the North. Incidentally, it was from the southern Nigeria that the political consciousness that that came up in terms of the struggle for Nigeria independence sprang up from one Igbo man known as Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe. He was so politically conscious because he had been trained in America. So he felt that Nigeria needed to also free itself from imperialism. So he started the political consciousness and the movement, towards Nigerian independence. But then towards the time it was due for Nigeria to gain its Nigerian government structure was handed over to the northern part of the country instead of the southern. And so, but the problem was that the space which Britain was leaving behind, I mean, in the civil service, needed to be, taken up by those who already were exposed to the Western way of doing things. And these people who were to do them were people from the southern Nigeria, having been exposed to education, to business, and all sorts of things. So that was how majority of the people from southern Nigeria moved to the north to fill up the spaces that were to be left behind by the British officials who were leaving. That was how majority of Igbo people found themselves in the north. Now, after the independence, there were a lot of political crises leading to electoral unrest, at the end of which we had a coup plot that destabilized that particular era. And then, because of the political interpretations, it was, it was rumored, that the coup was carried out by the Igbo because they wanted to dominate the rest of Nigeria. And so because of that, the Northerners had to organize what looked like what has been described by many as a genocide, massacre of the people, of the Igbo people living in the North. And so with that massacre, about 50,000 people lost their lives. And then the federal government looked away while the security forces showed no clear willingness, to contend some of the problem, at the end of which the Igbo. So with that, the killings didn't stop. It continued until the Igbo leader, Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, headed the idea of secession of Nigeria, of Biafra, so that the Igbo would live on their own. So with that, the federal government response to that idea was to wage a war that lasted for 3 years, from 1967 to 1970, leaving behind a death row of about 3 million people, So all these have generated a lot of fictional responses from authors, among whom I'm sure you know of Chimamanda Adichie, who wrote the Half of a Yellow Sun. And but then the writers that we are interested in our research here are S.O. Mezu and Elishi Amadi. They are the two writers that we have tried to we are trying to take a look at their work to see how the representation of the Igbo has been done in the publishing frame of Heinemann. And so that is how we got to where we are. And for us to continue, I want to show you, and I want to warn you that the images you're about to see may not really be the type you want to work on, but it is important for us to have a little idea of some of the pictorial evidence of that war.
That one of the deadliest wars in history happened in Africa, and you probably never heard of it. It was the Nigerian Civil War, a brutal conflict that split a young nation in the 1960s. It started when the Igbo people of the Southeast declared their independence as Biafra after facing persecution and violence by the Muslim North. The rest of the country saw this as treason and rebellion and launched a war to crush them. The war lasted for 3 years and involved many battles, sieges, and massacres. The Nigerian army, backed by Egypt and other foreign allies, had more soldiers and weapons than the Biafran forces, which depended on foreign aid and mercenaries. The Nigerian army surrounded Biafra and blocked its access to food, medicine, and supplies. This caused a huge famine that killed millions of Biafran civilians, especially children, who starved to death. One of the most heartbreaking stories of the war was that of Nwakuso Eze, a 6-year-old girl who was so skinny that her bones showed through her skin. She was among the thousands of Biafran children who were rescued by humanitarian organizations and taken to a hospital in Ivory Coast, where she recovered and was adopted by a French couple. The war ended in 1970, when the Biafran leader, Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu, fled, and his deputy, Philip Effiong, surrendered to the Nigerian government. The war took the lives of about 3 million people and left a legacy of trauma, bitterness, and distrust. The war also affected the development of Nigeria and Africa and their role in the world.
Thank you so much. And so that war still goes on today. And that is why we feel it is important to continue to research to find out how literature also contributes in the search for peace in Nigeria. So what we have here now is the map of Nigeria at present. So the country has been divided into 36 states, including Abuja here, as the capital of Nigeria. All right. So we'll proceed. Now, this paper is an interdisciplinary attempt to break through the bounds of disciplinary tribalism by drawing from literature and archival studies to meditate on the Nigeria-Biafra war and its afterlives. It is part of the grand project that is titled The Archive as a Literary Laboratory for Reclaiming Forbidden Biafran Voices, which I am carrying out with Dr. Sue of the Department of English Literature. So the work, this particular paper argues that the way Biafrans are understood and represented, fertilizes his current anarchic afterlife, So, but the paper departs from literary scholarship that had focused on published Biafran war narratives alone and relies on Homi Bhabha's thought space theory to offer a nuanced analysis of editorial correspondences relating to 2 published works on the war, which I have mentioned, Behind the Rising Sun by Mezu and Sunset in Biafra by Amadi. I argue that archival studies, archival materials on the war can help in understanding not only the politicized publishing ecosystem of Heinemann's educational books, but also how the politics reinforces the minoritization and demonization of Biafrans as rebels rather than as freedom fighters. So some scholars have really shown interest in the use of archival materials, to look at the publishing processes leading to textual production. In the works of, we see some of these scholars like Chinua Achebe, who has observed that the publisher and the author must operate in the same historic and social continuum. And then Chukwu Mazonye, has also adopted this strategy in investigating Christopher Okibo's unpublished writings. Then Beth Lindfors has also affirmed the need to preserve the archives of African literature for future scholarship. Then Peter Schillingsburg also argues that critics might profit from knowing what editors who have traced composition between authors and publishers, what they can tell us about the context that an author brings to utterance in the act of creating a work of art. Then Sarah Brulett also argues that the material aspects of textual production are textual in their own right, and that reading this textuality of material production can be seen as an interpretive practice that aims at insights into literature itself. And then we have the research by Ibironke, who shows that contemporary literary criticism can connect with the material history of textual production to produce and provide context, define expectations, and set the angle by which we approach text. Then finally, Sue Welch and Temi Lolua have also carried out their own archival investigations to identify some insights on the publishing processes and procedures between Heinemann and the Biafran authors. So one important author we are dealing with is Tony Mezu, who was a Biafran diplomat. He was a deputy director of Biafran Historical Research Center in Paris. He was also a representative to Ivory Coast and Biafran delegate to different peace talks that were held in different parts of the world. And although S.O. Mezu was a very strong advocate of Biafra, he believed in an accommodationist Nigeria. He saw the war as a tragedy, not only for the Igbo, not only for Biafra, but for the Nigerian government and the non-Igbo Nigerians. And so he has also, in the course of the war, he was disenchanted with how things were happening. So he had to relocate to America, where he felt that it was better to contribute to the war from outside rather than from inside. So now, this representation of Biafra that we've been talking about, so we need to look at the ways through which Biafra has been minoritized or misrepresented within the publishing ecosystem of Heinemann. So I have just used the Homi Bhabha state space, to set in motion the model for the interpretation and the analysis that we are providing. And so in his third space theory, he interrogates the interstices of cultural conflicts and the liminal space, which gives rise to something different, something new and unrecognizable, a new area of negotiation of meaning. And so my own reformulation of the theory in question is that the Biafra, while the Igbo were resented in Nigeria in the years preceding that space where they were resented. Then the second space is they wanted to go, but they were not allowed to go. So that is the second space. Outsiders within Nigeria. So if you look at this, you see the dilemma that faces them. They're not able to remain, they're not able to go, then they find themselves within and outside. So Judith Butler, of course, in her Politics of Living Together, offers a political critique of censorship and points out how norms are established to define excluded bodies. But she raises concern about the implication of this exclusion to the fundamental dependency between ourselves and others. So let us find out how the minoritization of Biafra is demonstrated within Heinemann's publishing processes. The first is what I call Heinemann's editorial partisanship. And what is that? Heinemann editor, Kate Sambrook, has the position and believes that the Igbo were victims of a miscalculated move to calibrate their historical opportunities to dominate the rest of Nigerians. So his argument is that no matter what the Igbos say, there is no doubt that Totona and the Azikiwe actually wanted to use the Igbo network, of civil servants that we are spread all over the country. He wanted to leverage on that particular opportunity to dominate the rest of Nigerians. That is the position of an editor in Heinemann. So the question is, as an editor, is he expected to read a work from this perspective as if he were to be a politician? And so that is for Sambrook. And then Ed Higo, who was the general manager of Heinemann Nigeria then, also felt that Tony Mezu's behind the rise, S.O. Mezu's Behind the Rising Sun was biased in his representation of the facts of the war. In fact, he said naturally, Mezu saw the war from one side, the Biafra. He saw Biafra in Biafra, Biafra in Europe, Biafra in the battlefield, and the refugee camps. Now, Higo did not recuse himself from the work, but he went deep down into it like a participant rather than like an editor. So he said, naturally, the war was still on when Mezu wrote. He couldn't predict the way it ended. He therefore ended with this apocalyptic view with a new Biafra generation, united and Biafran. And so the question is, how could Higo assume the position of the Nigerian federal government, rather than the position of an editor when he described Mezu's vision of a victorious Biafra as apocalyptic? Now, by what he did, it is possible that he tries to deny the creative artist the freedom to envision how the war would end. What Mezu wrote wasn't a historical text, it was an imaginative text. So as a creative writer, Mezu could also envision a Biafra that would end victoriously. That is literature, not history. Then the next is the elimination and the inclusion of Biafra in book titles. Mezu's novel was initially titled Inside Biafra, Outside Biafra, but Heinemann later decided to change it to Behind the Rising Sun. And then the same way, Amadi's memoir was earlier titled Sunset in the East, but it was later changed to Sunset in Biafra. So this politicization of titles is perhaps connected to the forbiddenness of the use of the word Biafra in official Nigerian discourse at the time. In fact, Higo, the general manager of Heinemann in Nigeria, refused to use the word Biafra in all his correspondences. He preferred to say the Eastern region because he felt it was unnecessary. It was a kind of dignifying Biafra by mentioning it. So what we saw is that wherever the name Biafra was present, it was for a negative reason, And then Sambrook had hinted at the political undertone while suggesting the need to change Sunset in the East to Sunset in Biafra. He said, Sunset in the East has so many connotations in this country that I think it may be a misleading title. People think of the Orient and the passing of the empire and all that sort of thing. So by replacing East with Biafra, the doom of the war will be limited to a particular group of people. So if you remember, Amadi, whom we are going to meet, Amadi hailed from Eastern Nigeria, but he wasn't a core Igbo. He belonged to the group that called themselves the minority Igbo, who were usually sensitive of the core Igbo. They felt that the core Igbo were dominating and suppressing them. So they didn't want to, identify with them. Now, the censorship of the storyline of Behind the Rising Sun, a substantial portion of Mezu's manuscript was cut away on the excuse that it was too long, diffuse, and in need of attention, and on the ground of quality and marketing. Now, a greater part of it was cut off. For instance, in chapter 1, the storyline about corruption at the British embassy was altered because it was felt that the British government would have reason to object to it. Then in chapter 2, the storyline about Air France was altered also because the episode might raise an objection from France. So was the storyline about bribery among French customs officials. In fact, Mezu was asked to be vague about who received the bribe. So the storyline again about some overseas banks that participated in shady deals was also altered. So at the end of the day, the manuscript was reduced from 500 pages to 241 pages. In response to this, Mezu told them, as you know, I look at Behind the Rising Sun not only as a novel, but as a crusading work. Naturally, economic considerations apart, I would like to see it come to being as soon as possible, for it will go a long way towards underscoring the uselessness of the war and of the mass slaughter going on in Biafra and Nigeria. If it succeeds in moving even a small section of the world to do something more positive about stopping the mutual self-destruction, I would consider it a success. So now, so in the next letter he wrote, he said, quite naturally, I could not, perhaps for emotional reasons and attachment, amputate a child I created, because he refused to cut off most of those parts that he was asked to cut off. So it's like asking him to alter the truth, and he was finding it difficult to do that. So he said the work had to be done by someone else. The most I can do is hope that the surgery, because this is seen as a surgery, that the surgery is in the interest of the child, his survival, his being, that the future will show that it was perhaps a necessary surgery. So the next is the commodification of the war within Heinemann's publishing frame. How did Heinemann try to make the war a gold mine? So Mezu had accused governments of Britain and the Soviet Union of turning the war in Nigeria, that Britain was punishing the Igbo for their pioneering role in the struggle for Nigerian independence. Sam Brock himself told Higo, even at the beginning of the war, as you will appreciate, secession couldn't have come at a better time as far as sales and promotion are concerned. It couldn't have come at a worse time for collecting payments. So for Kate Sambrook, the war was really a business opportunity for them. It has come at the right time. And then Hugo too, who was then Nigeria general manager of Heinemann, expressed optimism that the war would bring a boom in their business. And his only worry was how it would bring about a total stoppage of business with the people from the East. So what worried them was the profit side of the war, not really if people were passing through some kind of experience. So now we connect with the person I call writer in the liminal space of war. That is Elechi Amadi. Elechi Amadi hailed from eastern Nigeria, but fought on the Nigerian federal side against Biafra. While Mezu was what might be described as core Igbo, Amadi was an Ikwere, a minority Igbo group in Niger Delta. Amadi was among those who survived the separation from their families and so many troubles that came with the war. He was imprisoned by the then Biafran government, but only regained his freedom at the liberation of Port Harcourt by the federal troops. He lost his job, really, and in fact, his experiences during the war had to impact on his writing, and also had to shape the way he wrote the novel, Sunset in Biafra. So how was the idea of Biafra minoritized in Amadi's Sunset in Biafra? Now, Sunset in Biafra is a personal account of his detention experience, in which he condemns Biafra's false optimism and his unilateral declaration of independence and the long, gloomy night of horrors that followed. So, but what it represents Biafra as an inspired song, it also shares a dialogic communion with the radical antagonism about Biafra with Mezu's novel. So both of them try to show some of the corrupt practices that took place, especially among Biafran elites, those who went abroad and were squandering Biafran money in the way of, in the name of trying to find some foreign support for Biafra, So, but it captures the fate of minority Igbo living in Biafra, including the repression, the abuses, and the dangers of being too slow and too unenthusiastic in embracing the cause. Because then, if you were ahead, speaking against Biafra in any way, you were described as a saboteur, and as a saboteur, you were, imprisoned. And the idea of saboteur was really a major issue during the war. So many people died on the accusation of being saboteurs. So I just want to play just a little clip on how the saboteur was projected through music. Thank you. So I know you would not understand what the song was saying, but actually it was a kind of critique of sabotage, how even your own people with whom you are fighting had become saboteurs. Some had to do that because of the need to survive. Some did all kinds of things to survive, including betraying their own brothers, their own family members, and all kinds of things. So this is one of the songs, that were sung during the war. So we can continue from there. Now, sorry. So in Sunset in Biafra, Heinemann tried to celebrate the text, and they saw it as the best form of work that had come out of the war. In fact, because of that, they said it is a counter text to Wele Soyinka's The Man Died. So for Heinemann, the way they celebrated it, including sending it out for review to over 30 review houses, which was a way of trying to expand the frontiers of information about the text, the perspectives, was where they were spread out, which was denied to pro-Biafran text. No pro-Biafran text published within the same period was given a similar kind of treatment. So we feel that this is also part of the minoritization. Then, as we can see here, there is minoritization through the anonymization of Biafran war photos. And then we see that this sunset in Biafra has a very beautiful design showing a heavy military presence with a photo of a naked and hungry Biafran child and a distraught civilian, perhaps in search of something to eat. Then the picture of a Biafran soldier who turned out to be one Mr. Aura, a former Biafran soldier residing at number 14 Enugu Road in Nsukka. Now, Mr. Ora had in 1976 complained about his appearance without his consent on the cover page of the book, a photo which, according to him, had been causing him a lot of embarrassment since the publication of the text. Ora complained that the photo on the book portrays him all over the world as an arch-rebel soldier. But Heinemann's solicitors, advising them, told them that good commercial practice suggests making a moderate payment in circumstances where an unjustified claim amounts to a nuisance, which is worth getting rid of. In other words, he considered Ora's complaint as nuisance, and that the only way to handle that was to give him a little money so that he would stop disturbing them. Then Heinemann said there was no need, Then he advised them, if Mr. Ora refuses to go away, you might again consider whether to use a different cover or to offer him a small sum, either with denial of any responsibility. But Corey, who is also one of the editors, instead said there was no need of paying anything for damages, that they could easily alter the photograph. they could easily alter the photograph. So what plays out here is a form of deliberate trivialization of Mr. Ora's rights to how his image might be assessed, retrieved, or used. It is curious that the publisher's solicitors minoritized Ora's rights and sought to cover up an action that touches on publishing ethics and culture. To have used Ora's photograph, even without any biographical details, is an attempt to write him out of existence. The anonymity under which cover Heinemann sought absolution of responsibility transforms Ora into a ghost and works to consider historical and structural conditions of the violence that it was assumedly depicted. So if we go to the next slide, we see that the anonymization of Mr. Ora's image, like that of Don McCollins' starving 24-year-old mother with a child in Biafra, is part of the strategies used to deny agency many Biafran war photographs circulated in Western media spaces. The photographs have been mobilized either to mock Biafra or to demonstrate showmanship about the power of Nigeria and her foreign allies, or both. It is far from being a sympathetic gesture, since one could hardly be an oppressor and sympathizer at once. So the idea is this. Some of these pictures that were taken, and they were circulated in Western media. Is it not to mock Biafra? Because for the British government, they were available when the Igbo were being massacred. They did not talk, they did not speak. But when the war started, they came and joined the federal Nigeria to fight Biafra. And then to take pictures of victims of that war. So what role were they playing? It is a question that we find at the end of this discussion. It needs an answer. So in conclusion, we have examined a selection of published and editorial materials on the Nigeria-Biafra war that are housed in Heinemann AWS archive at the University of Reading at Mall. And I have relied on Bhabha's thought space as a theoretical strategy. And I have deployed archival literary methods to examine the politics and the ideology surrounding the history of publishing Biafran voices within Heinemann's publishing enclave. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, that's great. We have plenty of time for questions, in fact. So would anybody like to go away?
Can I start?
Go ahead, Hatton.
During your presentation, which is very informative and really I can compare it with the situation in Middle East, as they call it Middle East, as you said, they change the orientation, names also, right? So do you think there is a romantic element that promote divisions with the help of imperialism and colonialism, and this sort of division between Nigerians taking place because it is backed by imperialism?
Yeah.
How do you comment?
Yeah, thank you so much. The Biafra war has its origin in imperialism. In the first place, the amalgamation of the two distinct protectorates into what we call Nigeria today is a major contributor. But then the colonial attempt to do that was for administrative convenience. Nigeria divided into those two parts. One part was already exposed to Western way of life, exposed, they were educated, they had already produced merchants, very rich merchants. All right, but the north was quite poor in the sense that they were leading their normal natural life. But then the colonial strategy of ruling the two protectorates were different. For the north, they used the system of indirect rule. They ruled them through the emirs, right? So many of them, the northerners were not interested in Western education. In fact, those who were interested in that were known as infidels, all right? And because, most of the time when you want to hand over rulership, you want someone who will protect your interest. So Lord Lugard had already established one kind of relationship with the North, and the North were not as restive. They were not as pushful as the South. So they needed to hand Nigeria to a people that they could still continue to have some kind of relationship with. And remember that as Sambrook, which is part of the archival report from the archive, Sambrook noted that oil was also at the heart of the problem, because there was oil deposit in southern Nigeria, in the eastern Nigeria. Do you understand? So they felt that, in fact, as at then, oil was a major source of revenue for the country. So there was struggle to, control that oil. I remember that Britain had Shell Corporation, Shell Oil Corporation, as a major oil corporation in Nigeria. So that interest needed to be protected. So by trying to break away from the rest of Nigeria, that oil would have gone to Biafra, all right? And it would have been quite difficult for, a kind of cordial business relationship to exist between Britain and Biafra. So the only way the business relationship could progress was through the whole country remaining the same, so that Nigeria is still in charge. Do you understand the point? So that oil, for the Biafrans, they felt that they needed to break away again. At the time, they felt they needed to break away, that oil belonged to them, and with that they could develop Biafra and show the rest of Nigerians how to run a country. That's what they said. So at a time when some efforts were being made for reconciliation, they said it was already too late, that they were seceding. That is part of archival material, evidence from archival materials. You understand? So the major problem then was the imperial influence, because the arms and personnel that were mobilized for that war came from outside. Do you understand? So if left alone, Nigerians wouldn't have killed themselves with their bones, with their hands. It was the material, the resources, all of them coming from outside, all of them with their own interest, both those supporting Biafra and those supporting the federal government. And there were a lot of manipulations arising from corrupt practices. Like I mentioned, some of the banks that were fingered in Behind the Rising Sun. But you know that Heinemann decided to do away with those portions of the novel that tried to expose some of those deals.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that relates to the kind of tension, because you were talking about the fact that Mezu's text is a fictional text, but at the same time, it's clearly read by and understood by Heinemann to be not just fictional.
Exactly.
And indeed, from what you're saying, that is also to an extent how you interpret it, that it wasn't just fictional. And so part of the issue, as I understand it, is also a kind of sense of what is Heinemann's legal position with respect to a text that is making these sorts of claims. Because there's quite a lot of to and fro, I think, in the archives about whether it's okay to make this sort of claim legally, and then there's the sort of apology to Mezu from one of the editors because they hadn't realized that he himself had a law degree.
Yeah, that is correct. When the editor was pointed out to Mezu that most of what he wrote were libellous, he didn't know that Mezu was a lawyer. He had I think he had a master's in LLB. He had a master's in law. So when Mezu replied to him and told him, please, there's no libel here. I myself have a degree in law. So he now withdrew. He said he was sorry. I apologize. When I was making those comments, I didn't know I was speaking to someone who has a degree in law. So it means that if Mezu had been a layman, do you understand? Some of these things would have just been given to him and he would just accept them just like that. Do you understand the point? So the thing there is, Heinemann is a British-owned company. So his interest is also aligned to British interests. So whether we're dealing with fiction or we're dealing with history, Heinemann didn't want to, differentiate itself from being a partisan, a partisan player. I think that publishing culture should try to look at some of these things, that the publisher should try to maintain an objective stance. If you are carrying out editorial work, you edit as an editor, not as an involved participant, not as if you are a Nigerian soldier. Because some of the approaches, alter this, alter that, alter this, alter that. It shows someone who is interested. And then like I noted, for Ehigo to say that the ending of the novel was apocalyptic because it ended well for Biafrans. It's a novel. So he said it shouldn't have ended well for Biafrans. So, yeah.
Question, I think, related to the ending of the novel, because you had some thoughts about that, I think, didn't you?
Yeah, I read the ending of the novel as sort of the character's attempts to set up a community against colonial practices and norms. So I thought that it's quite interesting saying it's apocalyptic, because I read it as like an undoing of like British colonial exploits.
Yeah, so the point there is Mezu wrote from, I think, unlike they claim that his work was biased in the assessment of the war. I mean, the work was somehow objective because he tried to lay much accusation to the Biafran elite who were exploiting the war opportunity for their own personal gains. But then he had this idea of Biafra being the hope of every Igbo man who has find out that Nigeria was no longer conducive for any Igbo. Remember that he wrote at the heat of the war. The persuasions, the sentiments of those writing during the war and those of those writing after the war are not the same. You can find out that if you were to be a Biafran writer writing during the war, the tone of your text will be different from someone who is not a Biafran and who wrote after, when the war had already ended. Those pictures were no longer in circulation. If you read Half of a Yellow Song, what you see there is a pacifist kind of writing where somebody is trying to say, let us reconcile. The tone is reconciliatory. The author was not on 1977, many years after the war. So the report she gave was based on what she read from books and the stories that we are told to her by her parents and all that. So you will see that somebody writing within that time frame would want to be asking for reconciliation, but somebody writing while the war was going on and was part of, he was an insider. He was director of Biafran Historical Research Center in Paris. And he was representing Biafra in all the countries where French was being spoken, because he was trained in French, you know. So he was translating it. So he had the materials available, you know. And so what he tried to do then was to envision a Biafra that, you know, that will accommodate everybody. Not that it has come to be, but that was his dream of the Biafra he was trying to defend.
Some questions on the Teams link. We have one from Sunday Okapuake. I, however, want to know how you see the war as if it is still going on. Is the Biafran war still in progress? How is it still an ongoing war?
Thank you so much, Dr. Ape. As I speak to you now, it is not possible for me when I return to Nigeria to go to my village because of the groups that have, you know, emerged out of Biafran agitation. So they have taken over everywhere because one of the leaders of, the main leader of IPOB, that is the indigenous people of Biafra, Nnamdi Kanu, is in detention. He has been in detention for the past 2 years. And so in eastern part of Nigeria today, every Monday is declared sit at home. Nobody goes out. Nobody comes in. If you go out, they shoot you. People are killed on daily basis today. And so some of these people have taken over the villages. Some villages, people have fled from them. Their houses abandoned, including mine. And because of what? Because these people are saying, we are not accepted in Nigeria, allow us to be on our own. So the war was said to have ended in 1960, 70 in the battlefield, but it's still on today as we speak. So Dr. Pe, know that war is still on, and that is why it is important to continue to research, to find out what can be done. And so the argument is the way Biafra is framed, the way it is represented, the way it is understood is part of the problem.
There's also another question here from Dr. DM Withers, which is the full 500-page manuscript of Behind Rising Sun available to read in the archive?
No. The full manuscript is not available in the archive. So you have sketches of information of portions that we are cut off, and then the information that the original manuscript was 500 pages, and that it had been cut down to 241 pages.
Do we have any idea of where that original manuscript might be found?
No. So at the archives, at the Special Collections Archive, they say they don't keep authors' manuscripts, and the publishers don't keep it with them. Sometimes they return to the authors. Yeah. And remember that part of my research, which is also second part of this program, is the one that I do with Dr. Sue, and it is on the abandoned and poetry anthology that was written by Biafran writers and dedicated to Christopher Kibo, which was meant to be published. It had gone through all the processes, but then it was censored. It was abandoned at the point of publication. And that this was also politically motivated. It was part of the strategy of trying to forbid Biafran voices. In fact, one of the reasons for which it was dropped, given by Higo, the general manager in Nigeria, Heinemann, was that there were some portions of the collection that needed to be removed, but possibly because of the perspectives that they brought to the work, you know. So our attempt has been to recover some of these abandoned poems, to look at them and see to what extent they present perspectives that are so bad that they are denied publication. But it is also part of what we are saying, the denial of voice, the forbiddenness of the use of that word. And remember too, that one of the major issues is the fact that the Biafran question keeps being swept underground. I think it is nice to bring it in the open and then discuss it, you know, in a conversation form. And then so that if anybody feels injured, I think some kind of pacification might be necessary. And if that is done, I think peace will return. So our own stance is we do not have to alter or suppress the reality of the entire story of Biafra.
In a sense, you're looking for something like a Truth and Reconciliation Committee.
Sure, yes. A whole lot of scholars have called for reconciliation, but no attempt has been made by successive Nigerian governments, you know, to look at this from that direction.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. I don't know who was first. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a point really about gin and power. Really interesting talk. And I guess that process that you described of revisions and editing is that most authors go through from so working class writers, or they kind of face huge cuts. I guess I was just wanting to ask a bit more about, is there a way of, obviously the politics are like hugely pressing and really important, and I was just kind of trying to think more from a publishing studies perspective or from the editorial perspective, thinking about the constraints they're working with, or that idea of the 500-page text becoming a 200-page novel, which is marketable and sellable. Is there any way of thinking about this in terms of like value or editorial, you know, revisions as a professional practice? Impacted here by people who are hedging their bets around, and you know, the British colonial context as well. So I'm not trying to criticize what you do. I just wondered if there was any way of looking at.
Yeah, I think you're thinking about, you know, the kind of work, for example, that Gail Lowe's already done on the work of, and I've forgotten his name, but you know, there are numerous instances of authors in the African Writers series who undergo heavy revision, particularly when it comes to actually new authors. And I think this was one of the issues for Mezu, wasn't he? He wasn't an already established author, whereas Alechi Amadi was. And I think that is perhaps part of the difference in the way that they were treated. Yeah, so that is the truth. As at the time Mezu wrote, and of course, Behind the Rising Sun, he didn't write any other major literary text. So before Alechi Amadi wrote Sunset in Biafra, Heinemann had already published his The Concubine and the Great Pawns. And these were very successful novels. So when he came with this manuscript, he was already naming his price, even when they had not read it. And then again, when he brought the manuscript of his The Slave, which he wrote some years later, so after editorial review processes, they said it wasn't a successful work. He needed to review the work. He needed to carry out some corrections. But he insisted that there was nothing to correct, that everything was okay, and that he wasn't going to do any revision. And they tried to, you know, at the time they were begging him. He said he wasn't going to do that. And he didn't do that. And Heinemann published him. They published the work without that suggested revision. So, you know, that kept me thinking. And at that point, the way he was even speaking so confidently,
So I think writers need to be confident, when they have written, they have to be confident not to dance to the tune of the editors, because some of the time, the editors' arguments may be based on their own perspectives. And in creative writing is like dreaming. You dream alone. You are the only one who know what you dreamt about. So somebody can't come to tell you, look at what you saw in that dream. So author's confidence is very
I
important.
think we've got some more questions. We're just running out of time. So, you had a question.
Yeah, one part of the question is related to the previous one. You said that Heinemann was a British publisher, so hence their position. So I wonder, you might not have the answer now, but I wonder how you will distinguish what is political, ideological, what is business related, etc. Because even in my case, looking at Turkish novels, I'm working on one that they found it too long, chopped off the last chapter, didn't even like the ending, but couldn't change it. So I'm sure there are plenty of similar examples. So there's that. And also similarly, I wonder how you will position yourself, because obviously you're very much, already positions, you have your own perspective and a strong one, we can all see it. So as a researcher, how does it affect your approach to your research, choosing your material, evaluating your material, etc.? Again, I don't necessarily expect an answer, but I think these are
It's a crucial question.
issues, right? Because on the one hand side, you almost, or maybe, openly accuse certain sides, but everyone is involved here.
Yeah, thank you so much. In the first question that has to do with the business and the political, Heinemann actually found himself in a state of dilemma to negotiate between the politics, because on the one hand, they complained that if they publish, for example, if they publish the collection, the abandoned Usuka poetry, that the Nigerian security forces will go after them. Do you understand? So they didn't drop it because of the weakness in literary value, but because of this idea that it has a pro-Biafran thematic preoccupation, which will attract the anger of government against them. On the other hand, for Amadi's text, I am so sure again that they are looking for a handy book that will be easily marketed. However, if you consider some of the aspects of the work that were removed, you will find out that it is beyond marketing. If, for instance, he was asked to just go and bring the novel to a sizable, length, without mentioning specifically areas that need to be altered, because if you listen, I had concentrated on areas he needed to alter, so that is the point. All right. So both politics and business, influence their editorial decisions. So that is also a question for book culture experts to find out whether it is really justifiable for politics and profit, to influence editorial decision, especially in terms of the ones that have to do with ethics. Do you understand? So the other one, so I will try to navigate my way out, especially by allowing the materials to speak for themselves. I think you understand that one, oral presentation is different from written presentation. So when I am making my presentation, you are already reading the text through my face or through my voice. But the work I have written might not speak that way. And again, if you realize that I am afraid of where to return to when I go back to Nigeria, you will understand whether I need to take a stance, in the way I'm carrying out that research. But that's very fine. I am trying to try as much as possible to remain objective as one carrying out scholarship.
So, we are good. I think
It's already
we have some here.
6. Are you looking at it?
Yeah, it's good. I think we're fine. Okay. Yeah, so I think Dr. Withers is also sort of saying bringing your research into dialogue with the growing body of research centered on the editorial practices in publishing studies is a kind of similar point to the ones you were making. And there is also a question from Stella Ageni. This is a very engaging conversation. My question is it okay to refer to the eastern region of Nigeria as Biafra when constitutionally there is no Biafra?
Yeah. You remember that the material I am working with materials that are based on what is there at the archive. I am talking about the Biafra in the archive.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about the Biafra that is in my village now. Okay, so but Eastern Nigeria, the whole of Eastern Nigeria is not Biafra in the sense that there are some people who say they are not part of Biafra. So at a point, Biafra seems to have been apotheosized, into something, an enigma. Biafra, they say Biafra is a spirit. So that is the way it is now. But the thing is that people look at Biafra as the evil, as what will answer them, the question Nigeria has refused to give them, So simply because even when an Igbo man almost won, I don't know, the previous election as a Nigerian president, he was denied on the ground of these discussions. Do you understand? So that name Biafra is haunting those who wear it as a pendant. Even among the Igbo, a lot of people do not believe in Biafra. A lot of people do not believe in Biafra, especially those who have become victims of what the agitation has produced. The agitation has produced a lot of monsters now. When the war ended in 1970, and then they banned the use of Biafra, it went underground, only to reappear pregnant with a sperm of violence and monstrosity. So when it came out, those monsters, it is not easy for people to contend with those monsters now. So you have splinter groups here and there threatening not only Nigerians, but even the Biafrans, the so-called Biafrans themselves.
So thank you very much, everybody. I think we have to stop now. We've gone over time, but thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm just gonna. Yeah,